And joining me live in studio to unpack this a little bit further is Professor Ntuli. He's an African historian joining us here on Morning Prime. Thank you so much for your time here on Youth Day. Firstly, how did this day 40 years ago rewrite the history of South Africa?
I think it rewrote the history of South Africa because it's not only the events that happened on that day. What happened subsequently? What happened to those people whose friends were shot down? What happened to those that escaped and went into exile? And I remember that 1976 I was in exile in Swaziland. And when we realized that the only way for people to escape South Africa was through Swaziland and no longer through Botswana. That was actually blocked. So we involved then in getting these people from the border. Some of them went over into military training, and then they came back and fought. I can speak here, for instance, of the Silverton 3. They were the generation of 1976 coming from Deep Kloof, went there and trained and came back. Many of them were in guerrilla fighters, and many of them went over to academia. Others are advocates today and professors and leading actually commentators. Some of them are now in big top kind of business because the spirit of 1976 inspired them in whatever calling, in whatever field that they were pursuing.
And we just want to show you right now, this is live visuals from the Hector Peterson Memorial as Deputy President there, Cyril Ramaphosa, was laying wreaths down. As we continue our discussion, you will be seeing these live visuals from the Hector Peterson Memorial as they happen. Returning now to our live guest, Professor Ntuli, who's an African historian. I wanted to ask, people who weren't born during apartheid, they seem to, many see this as just another public holiday. What would you like to say to these people about how significant this day was and to create the South Africa that we are living in today?
I mean, in 1976, over 600 people died there, according to the Truth and Reconciliation. And at that time, it did. The South African government said there were 32. You see the danger of having to block newspaper headlines, censoring, these things. That's why people end up being very confused, today. It was a day of sacrifice. It was a day where people said, we want to shape our own destiny, not in a way in which the government system wants us to do so. We need to have a say. It was also a way of a freedom of expression, a freedom of choice of what education, what the media we have to take. Those students in there, together with their teachers, made a choice. And that choice resulted in death, but it resulted in many of those people being committed to do something good, and some of them are continuing to do that good even today.
And now today, talking about youth emancipation, I mean, is there truly freedom for the youth in South Africa today?
I think there is freedom for the youth today. But the only terrible thing is this: we are unveiling, we are putting up wreaths, right? Not long ago, students were saying roads must fall. They realized the power of monuments. Do we have a monument placed in Soweto to say this is what happened? Do you have a monument placed in Bisho to say these were the massacres? Do you have a monument in Marikana, monument anywhere else? We bring down other people's actually monuments. If we had monuments in Soweto, people who are even confused today, like the question you have asked, would have known that that monument there speaks about something that actually happened. So our own kind of shortcomings and myopic view actually of a life, and denying how history has got to be manifested through memorials and through these things, results in people believing that today is just an ordinary holiday.
That's true. Talking about how the youth tackle these issues today, the roads must fall, the fees must fall campaign. Even in Tuks University, they are, against the medium of instruction, being Afrikaans. It seems that history seems to be repeating itself, maybe not in such a violent sense, but it seems that the youth are still fighting for these issues 40 years on.
They were fighting against this 40 years on. I forgot also one of the most important things is some of the youth that came out of 1976 and went to America Britain, Germany, and everywhere else. Were musicians. Some of them were poets, right? And how they used those their poetry, their art in the anti-apartheid movement. I'll just quote one poem that was written just before when 76 was occurring by a late guy called Pitika, called Generally Speaking. Generally speaking, we canon saluted General de Gaulle of France. Eisenhower, we watched his bowing out parade. Eisenhower of America, we sent him packing. As for General Spinoza of Portugal, he lost his generalship in the African bush. As for the founders of their racist barracks, General Botha, General Smuts, General Herzog, it is time for us to take cover. For generally speaking, the best of the generals is a general uprising.
Sure.
There were those young people who anticipated that there was going to be a general uprising. So when they fled the country, then they used their own kind of poetry to mobilize students abroad, business people abroad, filling the streets of it. That's one of the major contributions. I'm talking of people like Bani Mukhatle, Jibo, Petu Morena Munareng was one of the leading, poets who was going to America, anywhere else, with poetry, highlighting the plight of the South African people.
And now with the elections coming in August, how impactful or important is the youth today?
I mean, when you look at the youth is the majority of the voting people. And the youth, this country belongs to the youth. They are the people who are actually the future. It is the youth that must go there actually and vote to determine, their own future. If you look at what happened in, say, Cape Town when during the fees must fall, what was very interesting to me is that it was not just only the poor students that were demonstrating. It was the rich students, from different cultural groups coming up to say, we cannot feel privileged while some of our people are actually not. That's why we are beginning to see the spirit of youth, the spirit of change, saying we are prepared to lay our life actually onto the line. If we're in a different perspective or a regime, they would have shot the people who could have repeated. But because we're in a democratic place, we did it. And so in other words, the same issues that happened in 1976, the issue of language are in the forefront of what the people are. The issue of the images that speak of our own kind of history are on the agenda, except that neither the corporate people nor actually government realizes the need, for monuments and statues. No wonder that leading sculptors in this country are beginning to think of going back to London. I'm making huge sculptures, 21 more than life size for Flag Plus, but nobody seems to be interested in them. As a result, that in January, my wife and myself are going back to London. Maybe we'll be appreciated and die peacefully. Oh
no, you must stay in South Africa, be proudly South African.
And be frustrated.
No, not frustrated. Because as you can see, there has been a change 40 years on. Professor Ntuli, thank you so much for joining us here on Morning Prime. That is an African historian, Professor Ntuli, talking to us about youth